So, I'm back. Welcome to another one of these chit-chat videos. Hello. Let's get into it. I don't know if you guys have heard the news, but back in October, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, offered a $20 billion lifeline to Argentina. And I would like to discuss today why this U.S. aid to Argentina matters to American farmers. Before we get into this video, please remember to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. So, why does this U.S. aid to Argentina matter to American farmers? Well, I'm going to tell you. As I said, the U.S. offered a $20 billion bailout package to Argentina in October of this year, 2025. And naturally, this forced a few questions. Namely, why did the U.S. offer billions to Argentina in the first place? And why are U.S. farmers so furious about this? Like, what's the connection there? And finally, what does this have to do with China? Because yes, China is involved. Are we surprised? So here's a short summary of the story. Obviously, Argentina under Milei has basically meant inflation, austerity, and currency devaluation. The peso is steadily decreasing in value, and if the U.S. didn't come to save the day, quote unquote, China probably would have, as China and the U.S. are always looking to expand their influence in Latin America. So this financial support was a $20 billion currency swap from the U.S. Treasury, and actually about $5 billion extra, aside from the $20 billion, is a mix of sovereign wealth funds and private banks, all for the purpose of stabilizing Argentina's economy. This was an opportunistic move for the U.S. It was an offensive play against China in this current trade war, but also in this geopolitical game where the U.S. and China are constantly looking to kind of put roots and dig their claws in a little bit in Latin America and in South America. So, background. Argentina is one of the world's largest soybean exporters, especially of soybeans and soy products, taking third place after the US and Brazil in global soybean production. But here is the kicker. U.S. farmers end up getting undercut when Argentina's soybean exports rise, especially to China, who used to be the American soybean farmers' top client before, what? The tariffs. Oh, the tariffs. How famous they've become. Infamous, rather. You may know that the U.S. and China are engaged in a trade war. Well, China's retaliation with said tariffs, example given, 20% tariff on U.S. soy, is to drastically cut U.S. exports. China was previously the largest market for American soybeans, according to the American Soybean Association. Naturally, this opened the door for other countries like Brazil and Argentina to capture Chinese soybean demand. But what happened after the Argentina deal? Right after Argentina was offered U.S. support, it removed export tariffs on grains, soybeans, wheat, etc., making them cheaper and more attractive to foreign buyers, particularly China. And the result was a surge in Chinese imports of Argentine soybeans. China snapped up huge purchases of Argentine soy while buying none from the U.S., obviously because of the 20% markups, which drove down global soy prices and hurt U.S. farmers more than anything. So U.S. farmers are angry, obviously. First, the government, I want to start even before we talk about the trade war, before this lifeline was thrown to Argentina. The first thing everyone should know that maybe people don't know, maybe it's not such widely dispersed information, The first thing we should talk about is that the government practically forces farmers to grow soybeans because of the heavy subsidies involved. Then they lose access to China, their biggest buyer, because of US tariffs. And now rivals are filling that gap because the US enabled it. And while the US promised to compensate for the losses using tariff money, farmers would rather sell their soy products than receive government payments, because government payments are rarely seen by the farmer themselves due to markups on inputs. Again, this is something that is probably not such widely known information, but this input monopoly is a big problem for our food supply, for the agricultural industry in general. Supplies needed to grow our food have become marked up to the point where they're nearly impossible for farmers to afford these materials and these supplies. And these inputs are now completely controlled by agricultural input supplier monopolies who mark up costs because they have no competition and essentially force farmers into debt. So those so-called government bailouts are never seen by the farmers. They're sent directly to whoever they owe money to, and they don't see a penny. So of course they'd rather sell or have the opportunity to sell crops, sell their product, because it gives them the ability to actually profit, make a buck, see some return on all of the work that they're putting in. So, I mean, that is one broken system. And of course, the official US narrative is that this deal is about geopolitical influence and stabilizing a key economy rather than purely agriculture. Basically, agriculture and farmers are the collateral damage, the necessary collateral damage to move forward with their geopolitical influence and their efforts to stabilize the economy. And there are officials pushing for a trade deal with China to reinstate US soybean exports to help combat this issue, but this doesn't address the whole problem. Reinstating US exports of soybean to China isn't going to solve the issue. The key problems here are the following: agricultural input supplier monopolies, basically charging whatever they want and running farmers into the grave, literally, with no regulation, basically. Subsidies on select crops, which alone don't guarantee global market access, especially if tariffs block buyers. The US disguising this whole thing as an economic stabilization scheme, when in reality it has more to do with our trade war with China and beating China with geopolitical influence in Latin America and South America. And while, of course, there is the economic stabilization element to this, it's not the only thing at stake here, let's say. And here's why, after my research, I'm about to go on why I hate, or rather why I'm not the biggest fan of government subsidies for certain crops in the US, or in general really anywhere, but particularly in the US. Subsidizing a crop forces farmers to grow obviously certain crops because they get incentivized to do so. And obviously, as we talked about with these supplier input monopolies, a farmer needs basically government bailouts to just to stay afloat, to survive. So you force farmers to grow these certain crops, which leads to monocultures and food deserts because of multiple things. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but basically when you force farmers, when you force the land to only grow a certain type of crop all year round for multiple years, you completely deplete the soil, you deplete the actual food of nutrients, and there's basically the food that you're growing, it has to be seriously genetically modified to grow year round and withstand all sorts of weather conditions and pesticide conditions. And again, you're using all these carcinogenic chemicals and pesticides all over the food. So now we're leading into human health effects. Obviously, there's climate change effects because when the soil gets so depleted of nutrients, It no longer has the ability to sequester carbon in the ground, releasing a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere. There's just a shit ton of problems with this. And all of it to cut farmers from their buyers anyway. Like, I just don't understand. So we're basically being poisoned with monoculture, pesticide, chemical foods, and farmers have to go into debt for it anyway. Like, how does this make any sense? What's the benefit? What's the incentive other than these agricultural supplier or input supplier monopolies raking in billions, and somehow us having a stronger geopolitical influence in Latin America because of all of it, and us having the upper hand with the China trade deal? Like, it just seems like the collateral damage, so to speak, is really, really, really severe. So here it's clear that trade policy, not just domestic support, shapes who wins export deals. So let's recap the key tension. Tariffs drove China away from U.S. markets. Argentina filled the gap, and now U.S. farmers are caught in the crossfire. Well, what does this mean for the future? There's multiple possible outcomes depending on the following. In the near future, let's see if the U.S. and China reach a soybean trade deal. Will U.S. farmers regain access to China for the soybean market? We will also have to see how it goes with Argentina or even Brazil winning those export markets. And finally, could future U.S. policy shift away from subsidies and toward negotiated trade access? Good question. Don't know. I would like to invite viewers to comment. What should U.S. trade policy prioritize? Protecting domestic farmers, geopolitics, or global market access, or economic stabilization? Should we keep subsidizing soy, wheat, and corn? And what should be done about these agricultural input monopolies? Is anyone going to talk about these? It's like destroying the agricultural industry in the U.S. Anyways, thanks for listening. Please comment if you have any thoughts on some of the questions I posed at the end there. Please subscribe also to our Substack. All relevant links will be in this description below, as we also have a written content in a newsletter where these kinds of topics come up, and kind of global environmental news is always discussed in our newsletters, as well as written content about topics like these. And of course, follow us on socials. Again, all of that information will be in the description below. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll be back soon with another one of these. Ciao!